Welcome, my name is Beth Ann Gerstein and I'm the Executive Director of AMOCA. Joining me today are my colleagues, Pam Aliaga, who is, thank you, Pam, and Paul Roach, Director of Advancement and Communications, and Joe Loria, AMOCA's Adjunct Curator. It's great pleasure that AMOCA presented Elaine's show, the exhibition 50 Bowls, 50 States, and 50 Woodfires. And the exhibition was organized by Elaine. And for those of you who don't know Elaine's background, she'll talk much more in depth in her presentation. But Elaine is a well-known ceramics artist, curator, and writer. She is the former editor and publisher of the International Ceramics Journal, Ceramics Art and Perception, and Ceramics Technical. She earned her BFA from the University of Wyoming, an MFA from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and an MA in English at the University of Wyoming. She taught at Emporia State University in Kansas from 1996 to 2007, where she also served as the chair of the Department of Art for most of that period. She also served as the president of NCECA, the International Ceramics Magazine Editors Association, and she's an honorary member and fellow of NCECA. Her work is internationally published, exhibited, and collected, and she's an elected member of the International Academy of Ceramics. Please join me in welcoming Elaine Henry.
Thank you so much. Wow, I always think, who is that they're talking about? Because it seems like it's gone so fast. But I'm going to share my screen so I can show images here. Aha, there it is. There's my website. But I want to thank Beth Ann and Pam and Paul and Joe Loria for having this show there. It's been just wonderful, and the show looks great if you haven't seen it before. I'm going to go into my background here, mostly because I think especially for young people who might see this later, it shows them that it isn't what happens to you. It isn't what happens to you. It's what you do with it. So I'm originally a Minnesotan. I'm from a small town. It was an Icelandic settlement, and 3 of my grandparents were from Iceland and 1 was from Norway. The only bad thing about having you muted is if I say something really funny, you're going to miss it. And I have not had a linear path. These are the things that I did. I was first a student, a gift wrapper in high school, a telephone solicitor, a chicken cook, a terrible student, a waitress, a secretary, a marketing coordinator, a marketing consultant, chamber marketing director, trophy shop owner, a student, a potter and sculptor, university professor, an editor and publisher, writer, editor and proofreader, and I'm always a student. That's my life's work. My grandmother graduated with a bachelor's in education in 1906 when she was about 22. My mother in the center graduated with a bachelor's in 1933 and was also a teacher, and that's me on the right. And I finished my BFA the year I turned 47. I finished my MFA the year I turned 50, and I finished my MA in English the year I turned 75. So I'm a late bloomer. My mother as I said, my mother was a teacher. My father was a contractor. My mother passed away when I was 4. And so we ended up moving, and my father remarried. So we moved from Minneota, Minnesota, I like to say, to Rapid City, South Dakota, where I went to 1st grade, and then to Santa Ana, California, and where I finished high school. And with my new stepmother, I inherited 2 brothers, the 2 on the right, and then my brothers. I always make myself a little bit bigger than everybody else in this, just because I wasn't. And then when I finished, excuse me, I should go back. Then when I was about 11, my dad died. So my brother and I really bonded after that. And when I finished high school, my stepmother said, find somewhere else to spend your vacations. So I went up to San Jose for 2 years. But those of you who work with college students, you know how insecure you are at that age. And that was a terrible time for me. And a relative, a cousin, 20 years older than I in Chicago, invited me to come and spend the summer with her. And I ended up staying 2 years at their invitation. And so I moved to Chicago, and then I got married and moved to Ohio. There's my first husband and my 2 little ones. The one on the left, I always call her the little bald one. It has a degree in psychology and manages a pub here in Sheridan, Wyoming. And the one on the right with hair is an orthopedic surgeon in Michigan, and her practice is in Warren, Michigan. It drives her nuts that her sister's a bartender, but she loves the job and she's so good at it. And we then moved to, my girls were born in Akron, Ohio, and then we moved up to Grand Island, New York. And then we were subsequently divorced, and I moved back to Minnesota and then to Gillette, Wyoming. And that's another whole long story that I won't go into. But it was in Gillette that I met my current husband, Richard Garber. And he has been with the John Deere dealership, John Deere, all of his life. He owned dealerships, but it was in the 80s. So we'd both been through financial crashes, but he knew, and well, I also inherited these 4 lovely stepchildren, all of whom were grown when we got together. And one of whose offices I'm sitting in right now too. So Richard knew that I wanted to go and get my education. So we moved down to Laramie. You can see right here, we're in Laramie, Wyoming. And this is some of the work I did in Laramie. I was closest to an art degree. And ceramics was one of the things I had to take. So but I fell in love with it. And I know people hear that story from just about everyone in ceramics, that you started out not knowing and then ended up loving it. So I was working pretty representationally. This was a self-portrait I did my final year, and I just represented myself in shoes. And then I did a series of closets because it's the #1 place that we hide things. And when I cleaned my closet, I always felt like I could conquer the world. So it was very symbolic of that. This is one that is more 3-dimensional than the other, and it's full of, I didn't have a whole lot of idea about what metaphor was. So it's full of representational objects. There's my dirty laundry. There's a skeleton in the closet. There's excess baggage. And then up on the top shelf is this heart. And I was interested in what the heart really looked like when I started to make one in clay. So I arranged to go and draw from the cadavers in the anatomy lab, and that was great. I was between being a printmaker or ceramics artist, so I was really interested in the viscera, and it affected the textures and things that I did. So then we ended up going from here down to Carbondale, Illinois, where I earned my MFA in 1995. This is some of the work I did there. I was trying in this one to convey the idea of challenge, and like the salmon, I thought was kind of the epitome of that. And I realized when people looked at it, they thought it was an environmental piece because of the industrial look of the faucet. And I realized that every decision I made in this piece did not support my thesis. So I started working more abstractly, and I made a series of faucets there. And one of the things I loved about working large is that there's always a sense of discovery, because this piece, I could never see it in total. until it was put together, fired and put together. And my professor said, get off the wall. You know how to make things stand up, get off the wall. So this is the first time that I really let the clay have its way with me and just let it slump. My professor was Harris Deller, by the way, at Carbondale, and never regret going there. So I began to work a lot more abstractly. And this is a small piece, but I still had the love of paper. And this is handmade paper that I made. And just a small piece. I'm interested in spaces. You know, it's like, even like the inside of a bowl, it feels to me like it should be something you could ski down and never hit a mogul. I'm also interested in the way things fit together and the feet of things. I'm often climbing over fences to look at haystacks. Then here we were in Southern Illinois. I graduated and my husband had a job offer up here in Craig, Colorado, and I didn't have a teaching job yet. Then less than a year later, I ended up getting a teaching job in Emporia, Kansas, as Beth Ann mentioned. So this is work I did after that. I'm just going to breeze through these in the interest of time. At this point, the work was just textured on the outside and the insides were smooth. So then I realized that I wanted the metaphor of the inside being like the outside. So I'm still looking at viscera as well, but the insides became quite seductive. I worked for a while in steel and porcelain and liked that juxtaposition. My husband is a private pilot. And so I found that the things we saw from the air didn't influence me, but they did but the clay made me notice them, things I would not have noticed in previous times until I was working in clay. I made several large sculptures as well. And the drawing on the right is a life-size drawing. I'm a pretty passionate drawer as well. I was fortunate to get into the Ishing Teapot Museum in the mid-90s. Then through a faculty grant, I was able to cast my work in bronze. And that kind of skinned up my knuckles, making that, that mold on the inside of that. We're still flying a little bit and seeing, this is Western Kansas in the airplane, and some work that I just did two-dimensionally with gesso and pigment, squeegeeing pigment over my dried gesso. Then I think in part because of how early my parents died, at this point I had outlived both of my parents. And I thought, I don't know how long I'm going to be around, so I'm going to take advantage of everything I can. So I was invited to be in a symposium in Taiwan and made work afterwards. Then I did a residency at the Archie Bray Foundation. With the tiles on the top there, I challenged myself to make 100 tiles and never repeat a texture. Then the next year I went to Guliagol, which you need a mouthful of mashed potatoes to say, but it's a great little residency in Skalskjær, Denmark. This is where I met Fred Olsen, whom I know you all know. The next year I was invited to be in a symposium in Italy, in Faenza, and we decorated maiolica plates at the Faenza Ceramics Institute. The next year I went to the Sichuan ceramics factory in Foshan, China, and was there for 2 weeks with 24 other international artists. And this piece then stayed in their collection. Now there's a gap here because those are the 2 years, as Beth said, that I was the president of NCECA. So I didn't go off and do professional things those 2 summers. So in 2005, then the first year that the pottery workshop was functioning, I was a resident there for 2 months. I was on sabbatical from my teaching position and spent 2 months there. And I wanted to sculpt. I wanted to learn some of their techniques and sculpt women. So I learned their mold making technique, their overglaze decal technique. And I found that when I photographed the women in the street or in a restaurant, they would giggle or make funny faces. So I went and did Tai Chi with the local women. So the pieces that I did are all of local women, and their garments are these little porcelain pieces. They made this machine for me so that I could punch and cut the tiles at the same time. And then I wove them when I got them home. And I had boxes made for the 3 pieces that I did, and then assembled them when I got home. On the right is one of the crates of those is mine to ship it home. And these are the 3 figures that I did. They're about 5 feet each. There's a lot of symbolism in those. Then I was invited, I was shipped 2 of these little garden gnomes and told to decorate it and ship them back. So I did that. And one is in the collection at Westerwald, and the other one I think is still in a traveling show. I'm not really sure where it is, but. And then I'm sure you're familiar with the American Ceramics Museum in Fuping, China. It's one of 9 museums, each dedicated to a different part of the world. And I was invited to be a making artist to have my work in the American collection. These are the pieces, 2 of the pieces that I did. And then we were working in a tile factory where we had access to their molds. So I took their molds apart and gave the terracotta warrior, the Tang Dynasty woman's bound feet, etc. And I thought that maybe the factory owner would feel like I was being irreverent, but he kept coming through and giving me a thumbs up. So these are the 10 pieces that are also in that museum. Then I was invited to Christchurch, New Zealand with people I had met while in China. And we made great friends. So now I'm an honorary Kiwi. And then in 2008, I took over from Janet Mansfield the 2 magazines that she had started in Australia, Ceramics Art and Perception and Ceramics Technical, as Beth Ann mentioned. I've always loved grammar. So my husband calls me a grammar Nazi. And so it was a perfect fit for me. I just loved doing it. And I had a financial backer, what do you call it? I don't know, silent partner. That's what I had. So it was never really profitable, but I was fortunate to have that support. So here you can see more zigzagging. I was in Kansas teaching. So when I took over the magazines, I said to my husband, "You've moved 3 times with me." He was then in Kansas. And we moved then up to Wyoming, where we live now. We live in Bighorn, which is just outside of Sheridan, Wyoming. I'm going to go back there. I think it's really funny to look at the shape of your travels. And I've now been in 49 of the 50 states, but I've lived in 9 of them, and 3 of them I've lived in twice. So this is where we live, just in case you're ever out and about in Wyoming. Come and see us. We have an Airbnb in my studio, which is the tall building on the lower left-hand image. my kiln shed is behind that, and the house is to the left of it. So we have a beautiful view of the mountains. My husband grew up on this land. He's 4th generation. And so it's wonderful to be back where we are, where he's from. The mountains wrap around, they're to the south of us. And then the picture in the upper right-hand corner is actually to the west of us. This is the inside of my studio. The beginning of the bowl project is on the bottom shelf. So I just had them lined up by color there, the few that I had back at this point. It was like Christmas every time I would open a bowl when it would come back. This is just a little more of my more recent work. And you can see that, well, I wanted I do want it to look like the bowls and my functional work were made by the same person. So you'll see similarities in the feet and the bases. These are thrown and then altered and then layered up on. My desire has, I think, always been to be a functional potter, because I think it's harder than sculpture. And once I left academia and had no requirements to make something that would show, I started making bowls. And I still think it's probably the only thing that I'm good at in functional pots, but I love making them. And these were the precursors to the bowl project. I wanted to know what my work would look like in Woodfire. And Ashwini Bhatt, whom I'm sure you know, she was going to fire with Chris Guston in Massachusetts. So I asked her if I could send a bowl to have it fired. And I know Chris, and he said, sure, but I had to send 2 bowls. So I sent 2 bowls, and the caveat was that one would go to the silent auction fundraiser in Maine at one of the, what's the name of the
Watershed Center.
Watershed. Thank you. I went through this once today and said Watershed, so just fell out. Anyway, so this came back, and they were in 2 different chambers, and Chris gave me the choice of which one I wanted to have for the collection and which one I wanted to go to Watershed. So the one on the right is in the collection, and the other one was sold at the Watershed show. But when it came back, I thought, well, now I know that there's a big variation. And so this is what really kicked off the project. And as the bowls would come back, I would see how different they were. Allison Palmer's uses scrap wood, and Zach Tate at Notre Dame used a different kind of kiln, a different kind of wood. I also love the idea, and if you are able to see the exhibition, you'll see that each of these tells a story, and they are all of the same DNA, all the same clay, all the same glaze, and then they were shipped off for their own experiences. So some came back warped, some are a little teetery. You can see on the bowl on the bottom right how the ash gathered, so we know that was on the opposite side of where the firebox was. So each bowl tells the story of what it went through. Justin Lambert fires his kiln for about 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, and then he reduces down, so he gets these rich, beautiful surfaces. It's one of my favorite bowls in the collection. And after this, he then moved to Colorado. So he's in Colorado now. And then in contrast, Linda Christensen fires a Bury box kiln, and she fires for about 20 hours using just pine from her land in Minnesota and very little reduction. The Hawaiian Bowl by Clayton Amemiya is a 100-hour firing, and he uses a local clay, local wood, and it's the only one that is that pond scum green. I mean, there's a lot of variation in the bowls, but his stands out as unique. And then Jack Troy, his wife is Carol Ann Currier, and when she saw the bowls, she was going around and saying, well, these look like the work of the person who fired them, which I found to be interesting. And Justin Lambert was looking for the evidence of salt in those that were fired on the coasts, because he said there's residual salt in the wood from those areas. So this this show was partially shown at NCECA in Pittsburgh, but I only had 37 bowls completed. So I shipped I took all 50 bowls, but some were unfired. So they had an adoption form above them, just like the one does now at ICMEA. And several of them were adopted from states where I didn't know a wood firer. And I love the way in which ICMEA has displayed this show. It just needs to be in that linear fashion, I think. And it's here you can, if you haven't seen the exhibition, you can see the contrast. They're all wheel thrown, but they do vary a little bit. They started out with just about the same amount of clay. And again, they're so varied. There's on the right is Justin Lambert's bowl again. And I want to thank Paul Roach for these last photos that he sent me. And I haven't gone back and matched them with the names, and I need to do that. So sorry about that. After that, I still am working hard. I was a demonstrator in Australia at Gulgong for a week. And now the work I'm doing has changed a little bit. I was in Oxford, England, and went to the Ashmolean Art Museum, where I found a little porcelain cup that was backed by a little leather box and the inside was form fit to the piece. And it was called a traveling cup. And I thought, well, we need sculpture when we travel too. And so I have been making boxes to go with my pieces. So the inside, these are leather boxes, as are the two I just showed you. You can learn anything on YouTube. So I learned how to mold leather. I made a wooden mold, molded the leather for these two. And then now I lay this soft leather over a form. And then I just press the piece down into it, which is pretty much the way I work with clay. And the way what happens is it wrinkles, it does its own thing. And I love that about it. So these are just some other pieces. Then in 1999, when I was at the Bray, I did this form, and I've been revisiting it lately. Just went back to my old school and did a demo last year. So I'm still exploring forms, but these pieces now look like they're made by the same person. When I did my MA in 2020, this was my thesis statement. And I just put this in here because as a result of this, we now have a monthly meeting of people who are interested in critical writing in ceramics. And if anyone is interested in being a part of that group, we meet for 1 hour once a month. And we have a guest speaker who talks about it, and a lot of writers attend. And so if you're interested, put your email in the chat and I'll add you to the list. This is my collection of cups from home. And I show these because I want you to see that my life follows my work. My cup collection is as eclectic as my food. I love to run into sweet and crunchy and sour and texture in my food. I love America, but I never had a deep fried candy bar. I don't love everything about it. My husband and I, he leaves the lid up and I put the lid down. And we decided early on that we would make a mental shift, and all it means is that it's evidence of the other's presence. So I would know when I went in that he had been in there last, and that we didn't want to erase the evidence of the presence of the other one by having everything our own way. But we agree on the important things, which I think is good. I believe that we need to question everything. I believe, this is Ronald Reagan, I believe that we never know everything about everyone, about anyone, actually. He was at USC, I believe, and posing for a class. I believe in knowing my heritage. This is in Denmark in a Viking museum. And in 2017, my husband and I did the perimeter of Iceland. And I visited all 3 of my family's homestead sites. And this is one of 3 cousins that I'm in touch with in Iceland. I believe we should know the questions and keep questioning. I believe in starting new things. That people that thought I was crazy for going back to school at whatever I did and finishing an MA in English at the age of 74. But it keeps us going. And I believe I'm like the duck floating along on the top of water, but paddling like heck underneath and still going. That's me. That's the end.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I really enjoyed that presentation. So
Good.
I'm going to leave this time for Q&A. So if you guys would like to ask any questions, you can unmute yourself or write your questions down below. I'll kick it off first, though, with a question. I'm curious to know, obviously you didn't throw those 100 bowls all at once. Was there a time when you started the project where you're like, maybe just 50 or like?
No, it started out as 50.
50, right?
Started
okay.
there, yeah. And each firer just got 1 bowl to fire. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, I thought I should have made 100 bowls and let them keep one, mm-hmm. but I didn't. So, hindsight is 2020. But no, it started out as, once I realized how different the results would be in just in one kiln, then I decided to, engage more people. And I didn't have anyone turn me down. There were a few states I had to network quite a bit to find someone. Few states, and we still obviously don't have Delaware. If anyone knows of a wood fire in Delaware, email me. But
no worries, we've been asking. Always ask.
Yeah. But I started this actually in 2015, and then in 2016, some people like Richard and Pat will know, I fell down a flight of stairs the night before the NCECA conference and almost died. And so that was when I had to stop publishing the magazines, and I ended up selling them back to Australia. But and obviously then I didn't work for about 3 months, and I had to put this project on hold. So Chris Gustins was fired in the fall of 2015. So it was a long project.
No, definitely. We have a couple questions coming in. Ava Jane simply just wanted to let you know this was a thrilling presentation, and Elaine's work is beautiful.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
And we have Beth Ann Gerstein asking, do you have an idea of what will happen to this collection or project?
I would love to have a museum purchase it. I would like the collection to stay together, and it's now going to travel to, Beth Ann said, well, give me a price. So, and I need to do that. But then now it's going to travel to Kansas City, assuming all of those, to the Belger in Kansas City. And then North Dakota, the University of North Dakota would like to have it after that. So I'd like to have as many people see it as possible. And then I've been invited by Bloomsbury Books in London to do a book proposal, which I would then divide by kiln type and do a little history of each type of kiln, and then the bowls that were fired in that type of kiln. Mm-hmm. I also have images of, for most of them, of the place that the bowl sat in the kiln, some of the firings team, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to putting that proposal together and having it be, kind of a resource.
No, that's wonderful. I love that idea. Does anyone else have any questions to ask? Yeah. And something really interesting about the exhibition is that each piece has that little information about where that bowl was fired. It's been really interesting taking tours through, because everyone off the bat, everyone thinks it's a different glaze. And I always have to re-explain, like, no, this is the same glaze. And then I have to explain science or why this is happening in these wood firing kilns. But it's really interesting to see some go for like 48 hours and others go for like 100 hours or so. And then just getting to see the team that's actually put together with the kiln masters. Some teams are just made out of 2 or 3, and some are just going about for like 18 or 20 folks, which is always impressive.
Yes.
So it's been a wonderful highlight to tours. People really enjoyed it. And then I have Marian asking a question. As an undergraduate student in museum studies who is 65 years old, this has been a wonderfully inspirational presentation to many levels. Thank you.
Well, that's nice. And you know, when I was chair of the department, I had a student, a potential student, come to me who said, I'm 50. Am I too old to get my degree? And I said, well, in 5 years, you'll be 55. You can be 55 with a degree or 55 without it. And so she came to school to study, and I was really pleased with that. And my husband keeps saying, you should go get a PhD. No, I'm 76 years old, so I don't know, almost 77. So, but that's what makes life interesting. And I feel so fortunate, number one, with my family background, to have lived this long, and then to have had the support of so many wonderful people. And I because I was trying to keep my talk short, I failed to say that whenever I would come home and say, they want me to be president of NCECA, or when Janet Mansfield approached me about buying the magazines, his answer is always, who better than you? And so that kind of support has just been like, you know, he's the wind beneath my wings. He's been there to say, do it. Who better than you? And so I say everybody needs to have someone to, everyone has to have someone who thinks they hung the moon, and then we have to give it back to them. So I hope I do that for him as well. But I don't think you're ever too old.
No, never. I have a lovely comment. Joe Loria said this is a wonderful visual presentation today. And Patrick is asking, were there any firing disasters? Which I'm very curious about.
There were a couple of shipping disasters that were, because I was shipping them bisque fired and glazed. And there was one where the person wadded the bowl on the rim, and the bowl collapsed. So I shipped another one. There are a few bowls. There was another one that is actually in the show that was a student firing, and the person apologized because the person had stoked and knocked a bowl into the fire, into the ash pit. So it's really ashy on part of it. And some people say, oh, this is my favorite bowl, you know. But then, yeah, but none were broken coming back, which I thought was good. And there were just a couple of disasters.
No, definitely. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that one. I have John here asking, what area of the kiln would you prefer, and what type of woodier kiln?
Because this glaze, the clay is Continental Clay's Graulig porcelain, and the glaze is Fred Olson's Chino for wood fire. And because of the Chino, I prefer somewhere that's high reduction. The ones that were right next to the fire pit were a little too crusty for my, taste, but I didn't try to control that. I just tried to have the people record it so that those interested could know. where the bowls were in there. And like I said, I do have some photos of the positions, but I'm not a wood firer. So, which is kind of an interesting part of it. I wish I knew more about it and have learned so much from this. But, and doing the book, I think will make me bring all of that information together so I can see, oh, I really like this bowl and it was in this position, you know, so it will kind of make some of that information more cohesive. And I have not analyzed it or put it into spreadsheets or anything yet.
No, amazing. And we have one more question from Alexandra. I love the concept of the show and how beautiful but different all of the works are. What is your next project?
You know, every person in the world I have talked to as a woodfire said, send me a bowl. Mm-hmm. So I've thought of, and the Canadians, I was up at Banff Center for the Arts, and the director of the ceramics said, send me a bowl and we can do it in Canada. You know, well, there are mm-hmm. I think 10 provinces and area territories. So I don't know if there's a wood kiln in every one of them, but, and we've talked about doing this in China and in India. And so I don't know. When I was a guest demonstrator at Gulgong in Australia, I made 38 bowls, I think it was, and we identified the basically the most experienced wood fires in the country, and I distributed them there. I only have 13 of them back, and so I'm hoping that maybe next time I go to Australia, I can try to gather some of those up, because there's a different clay and a different glaze, but still an interesting kind of thing. So I'm not so sure that this project won't continue.
Mm-hmm. No, of course. And I mean, you are an official Kiwi, so I think that would be great if you did start in Australia.
Well, that's New Zealand. That's New Zealand.
New Zealand. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elaine, and it's been wonderful to have this whole collection in the exhibition. It's like I said, it's one of the college favorite tours to take.
Oh, good. That's great.
No, of course.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And could we, will you save the chat?
Yes.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Thank you all for joining us. This was a lovely presentation, Elaine. Really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Thank you again.
Yeah, good to see you all.